Hi folks, Rob Crompton here to share with you some thoughts about some of the arguments which are often used by ex-cult or counter-cult activists in their criticism of the Watchtower movement, the Jehovah's Witnesses. My starting point for this short presentation is the question, where did those beliefs come from? Now, I'm not going to go into any comprehensive historical investigation of the origins of all aspects of Watchtower teaching. Rather, I just want to focus upon a particular sort of criticism of the Watchtower, which could be described as an answer, in a way, to the origins question. This is something frequently used by opponents of the Watchtower. I'm thinking of those objections which seek to expose hidden or secret influences, secrets about who controls the Watchtower, who determines what its teachings are, secrets which are kept hidden from all rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses. Okay, so what are those secret origins? Let's take a look at them. And first on this short list comes the occult. Well, it's something which may seem rather odd and perhaps rather scary, surely, for the average Jehovah's Witness. And that's it. Many anti-Watchtower activists will tell us that the Watchtower movement is being manipulated by occult or demonic beings. And if that should seem too far-fetched to be taken at all seriously, bear with me. It might turn out to be more interesting than we would expect. Next on the list comes Masonic influence. Another barely believable accusation against the Watchtower. Well, maybe. But maybe not quite as crazy as the occult, perhaps. Well, okay, we'll see. What's the third on this short list? There you are, it's the Great Pyramid. I wonder how often you might have looked at photographs of the pyramids, travel brochures maybe, and spotted some connection with Watchtower teachings, doctrines you may once have believed yourself. What, never? Well, indeed, probably not. Hold on though. Crazy though all these objections may appear so far, there is much more to it, which I believe will lead us in a very interesting direction. Okay, so let's take a closer look at those three hidden external influences. Try and see what might be involved. First of them is the occult. And we do have to ask, what evidence could there be for the influence of occult spirit beings in Watchtower teachings? Typically, those who accuse the Watchtower of being under such influence, they'll point to the presence of subliminal images lurking in the illustrations in Watchtower literature. Here and there, we're told, we can spot demonic faces hidden in the artwork. Now, before we dismiss this kind of thing as the sort of thing we might find in all sorts of places, like in the flames of a fire or in the clouds or just about any artwork where we might decide to go hunting for hidden faces, let's see if we can find or suggest any possibility of making sense of it. We ask, how would it work? How could it possibly work? Who places the messages? Imagine someone working his way up through the Watchtower movement and into the upper echelons of leadership. Does there come a point when he's taken aside and shown how to introduce occult influence into the publications? Doesn't seem at all likely, does it? Far from it. And consider the ordinary folk, the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses who are studying the literature. Do they spot the occult bits and understand the supposed occult messages? Again, it seems hardly likely. But maybe there's another way to think about these subliminal images or messages. Could they perhaps be a bit like the evidence left behind, say, at a crime scene? Bits of evidence which the ordinary observer doesn't see, but which the forensic scientist can find and explain. Could those subliminal images in Watchtower literature be a bit like the fingerprints or the DNA of the occult beings who are responsible for the crime scenes of Watchtower literature? Okay, so far so crazy. It can get a little bit more intelligible though, because this accusation of occult involvement is not based only on the intangible evidence like subliminal images that we've just been thinking about. There's another major piece of supposed evidence, which, so it's alleged, shows the occult influence actually in operation. Because one of the biblical scholars who's referenced by the Watchtower in support of their New World Translation of the Bible was Johannes Graeber, whose work the Watchtower referred to in support of their renderings of a couple of verses in the Gospels. The problem with this for the Watchtower is that Graeber was an occultist who claimed support of the spirit realm in his translation work. It was really quite embarrassing for the Watchtower to, when Graeber's occult dabblings became widely known. And I understand that they've now backed off from claiming support of his work. That should raise an interesting question, which we'll come back to later. Are the Watchtower movement's uppermost leaders okay with all the other biblical scholars whom they reference? Scholars whom, unlike Johannes Graeber, they've not backed off from referencing. As I said, we'll come back to this later. So we move on then to number 2 on the list, Masonic influence. And once again, we ask for the evidence. And as before, in the case of supposed occult influence, the evidence we're shown are symbols. Symbols appearing this time in the early Watchtower literature. In particular, the cross and crown symbol and the winged orb, both of which featured in the publications of the very early years of the Watchtower. They're symbols having quite definite Masonic connections. These symbols, though, have long since, very long since, disappeared from Watchtower literature. So, again, we have to ask, how, if at all, Masonic influence could continue to work? Is it something which featured only in the earliest period of the movement's history? Or is there some continuing point of contact and influence? Again, imagine someone rising up through the levels of eldership until eventually being asked to, being taken aside and introduced to the externals. Well, where? At some Masonic lodge connected with the Society's head office? Doesn't sound plausible, does it? Okay, but there's another symbol that's frequently pointed out by anti-Watchtower activists, and that's the Great Pyramid. Although the pyramid within the Watchtower may appear to be something like those subliminal images, or the once favoured symbols shared with Freemasonry, it's rather more real and substantial than those. So there we are. We place it down there on the top of the Shropshire town of Ludlow, a very substantial Great Pyramid, which figures, believe it or not, in Charles Taze Russell's thinking about his countdown to the end times. The question that we need to address is, how does the Great Pyramid relate to anything at all in the teachings of the Watchtower movement? Basically, Russell's belief was that various dimensions of the pyramid represented periods of time in the countdown to the end times. And when they're interpreted on the basis of 1 inch representing 1 year, they corroborate the various time periods which he had identified in his interpretation of Scripture. So let's not focus so much upon this, albeit significant aspect of Russell's theories, that we fail to look at the earlier development of end times thinking. We have to continue asking, where did those beliefs come from? Where is the missing evidence? Now, the time-setting approach to religious belief goes back a very long way in history. Back indeed as far as the Maccabean period of ancient Jewish history, or even further. In the modern era, we also need to go back in time to find a starting point for our thinking, back to the 17th century, when enthusiasm for identifying time periods indicated in Scripture was already becoming well established. And it became well established among the Protestant mainstream, shortly following the Protestant Revolution against the Roman Catholic Church. And in this period, during this period, we find one Robert Fleming, a Scottish Presbyterian minister, who, along with many others, was fascinated by scriptures which seemed to indicate periods of time that had to elapse before various prophetic outcomes take place. And working on the principle that 1 day in prophecy indicated 1 indicated 1 year in fulfillment, Fleming worked out what was to become a very influential prediction. In his book, The Arise and Fall of Papacy, published in 1701, he predicted what he called a major humiliation of the main supporters of the papal Roman Catholic Church, by which he meant the French aristocracy. And this would take place, he told his readers, towards the end of the 18th century. So he's looking at scripture and he's finding time periods there and saying that about a century after his own period, you would have this major humiliation of the French aristocracy. And, well, the French Revolution came about just as he'd expected. And then, during the course of the French Revolution, General Berthier marched on the Vatican in 1798 and took the Pope prisoner. Well, it looked as though Fleming had scored a bullseye. And needless to say, this apparent success and confirmation of his approach, and others' approach as well, it gave much impetus to the search for a due date for the second coming of Christ. After lots of trial and error within the mainstream Protestant church, enthusiasm began to fade. Russell came on the scene in the wake of William Miller's failed attempt to identify the time for Christ's return. And that marks the point at which pretty well this attempt was abandoned by mainstream Protestantism and left for others, the fringe, to speculate about. And Russell's and others' speculations carried forward the end times focus from the mainstream and into the sectarian fringe. And that's a very important point to note. The interpretation of end times prophecy had been subjected to 2 centuries or more of trial and error within the Protestant mainstream before Russell and the Watchtower took it on. So we come to the point now where we must ask, did we identify any external influences upon Watchtower teaching? Yes, indeed, we did. There is the vast community of Bible scholarship. The Watchtower has apparently rejected one questionable member of that community, Johannes Graeber, whose credentials as a biblical scholar are doubtful. But that leaves many thousands of others whose work down the centuries has given us the text of Scripture which we have today, along with all the countless textual variations that are shown in so many manuscript copies and fragments. And then we have the long heritage of biblical interpretation and reflection upon doctrine. What of the religious affiliations of the people who've engaged in these pursuits down the centuries? Overwhelmingly, they are and were members of mainstream Christianity or Judaism. But note that vast empire, which the Watchtower labels as Babylon the Great, the world empire of false religion or the devil's organization, that's what has given us the heritage upon which the Watchtower, and the rest of us are crucially dependent. Without these, the Watchtower has nothing at all. Nothing. They're crucially dependent upon what they have inherited from the mainstream, from what they call Babylon the Great. And without the work of Babylon the Great, they've nothing. If you'd like to follow through any of these ideas about the history of the movement, I'll put a couple of links in the comments below to a couple of my books, Counting the Days to Armageddon and Pathways to Freedom, which you can browse and follow up this topic in much more detail. But for now, that's all. So I'll say bye for now, and see you again soon with another presentation of this kind. Bye, folks.